Gilmore, I think that the guys on the team realize, what he's doing. They love him, but he's taking care of business, and he's been taking care of business, and players in the locker room leave that separate. You don't
Right.
talk about another guy's business.
Yep.
You don't criticize another guy for going and getting his bag. You don't do any of that stuff. So I thought that would have lent Gilmore to going, but I think if the Patriots were really asking for a first round pick and a player, like Diana Rossini's report was, and I hadn't heard that from anybody, that's a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
considering that Gilmore's been a pain in the rear end on his contract coming into this offseason, and to the point that the Patriots had to do what they had to do, and also that Gilmore basically held out of meaningful camp practices, considering that's all the practice they got during the offseason. And I think that he's going to have to be given a new contract. Like, he's going to be 31 in September next year. He's going to be 31.
Yep.
Right now he's 30. He knows the clock's ticking. He knows he needs that extension this offseason. Who in the COVID reality, economic reality in the NFL is going to trade a first-round pick, a player,
Nobody.
and probably that means a younger player, a building block type player, and then hand over, $25 million a year to an aging quarterback? I mean,
yeah, it's not going to happen. It's not going to. I mean, I
no.
thought a fair deal would have been a second-round pick and maybe a young player, a second-round pick and a mid-round pick. Something like that made more sense to me. If that was Bill's hard line, I knew it wasn't going to happen. If Rossini is right and they were asking first-round pick and a young player, that's just not going to happen for a guy that, as you mentioned, is going to be 31 in September. And when you look at cornerbacks, when you get to 31, 32, that's when you start to see the decline. Darrelle Revis was pretty much done once he hit 32 years old. So the team has to think, whoever is trying to bring Gilmore in, not only is he now going to be on the wrong side of 30, but he's also looking for that big time contract. And, is the juice worth the squeeze, so to speak? So I was surprised. I also think, Greg, and I want to get your thoughts about this before we move on to something else. I think the future of Gilmore could be tied to J.C. Jackson. If you think Jackson is a true number one corner, then it's easier to swallow the loss of Gilmore if you're Belichick and be able to, get some of those assets for Gilmore. If you don't think that Jackson can be a true number one guy, then you might be a little bit more hesitant and you might be drawing that hard line for Gilmore. I wonder what you think. Do you think J.C. Jackson is a number one corner in the NFL? I'm not saying shutdown guy. Do you think he's good enough, Greg, where in the long term, Belichick's looking at this and says, hey, whatever happens with Gilmore, we've got Jackson?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at least it's equitable. And certainly with what Jackson's going to make, he's going to be an RFA next year.
Yeah.
So he's going to be at a decent contract next year, certainly compared to Gilmore. I don't a side topic to this Jackson thing, and I do think he's a number one corner, and I think he showed it on Sunday against Stephon Diggs. Outside of that 141-yard sort of catch and run by Diggs, he really didn't do that much in the game.
Yeah. Yep.
And they were certainly probably looking to test him because they knew Gilmore's situation. But, I think now the offshoot is, all right, well, now what do you do with Gilmore? Like, how is that all going to play out? Because that is not a guy who's going to play. He is not going to want to play for $7 million next year.
No way.
Which is basically what he's set to make because of what they did cap-wise this year. How's that going to play out? I mean, if he sat out for another $5 million this year because he wanted a contract extension, the Patriots wisely wouldn't give it to him. Now what happens? I mean, because he is not going to play for that contract. And now you get into – go ahead.
Realistically, you've got three options, I think, right? I mean, you either are going to hold on to him and give him an extension, which I think is highly unlikely because it already would have been done. Or two, you trade him in the offseason, and I can't imagine, with less time left on his contract and knowing that he needs a new deal and wants a new deal, I can't imagine that Belichick is going to get if he did ask for a first-round pick and a player. It's even less likely once you get to the offseason. So you can trade him. Or, the other option is to try to draw that hard line yourself in negotiations and say, listen, we love you as a player. This year is all screwed up because of how the cap has gone. Stephon, we really can't get you to a place who's willing to give you the money that you're looking for anyway. Let's try to ride this out and come to an agreement where, we might be able to find a way to give you a little bit of a bump, but you got to kind of take your lumps. So I think
That
those are
ain't
the three
happening.
options.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you're missing a fourth option, which is Armageddon, and they have to they have to do something. And I do think I don't think it can get to the. I think you can get to the trade, but I think there's going to be a lot of drama behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Before that. So I think that, man, this is a tough situation. They boxed themselves into, and I don't I don't envy them at all.
Here's what I think happens. I think Gilmore's gone by the offseason. I think inevitably it ends up being like a second round pick, and they end up giving a second round tender to Jackson. And then they have their spot where they have 2 second round picks if Jackson walks and they don't want to match, or they match and they bring Jackson back as their one to go along with Jonathan Jones. And then maybe you can spend another draft pick in next year's draft on another corner to cover yourself, because I don't think Jason McCourty will be back either. So I think that's how it will all come together in the secondary in a few months. I just, if I were the Patriots, I would have pulled the trigger this time around, because that way you can secure the return. And I don't know what the return is going to look like when we get to the offseason. All right, let's talk about this roster
Hey,
now.
real quick. So you mean a an actual rebuilding plan at cornerback as far as opposed to what they've done on offense? You mean actually, let's actually, look at what we have and trade and develop and maybe draft again to replace somebody? That sounds like a plan. Sounds good.
I mean, I think you replenish the cornerback position, you get younger, and you move on from Gilmore. Gilmore's not the difference between you getting to a Super Bowl and not getting to a Super Bowl this year. So I would have dealt him. I also would have dealt Tooney. Let's talk about this roster, though, now that, and I should say, if teams were interested, I don't want to take it for granted that there was a trade to be had. If teams weren't interested and, teams are trying to lowball you, I don't think you give up Gilmore for a third round pick. I just, if you can meet in the middle somewhere and get a second and something else, I would have done it.